So here we are, sharing secrets of the soil with me, your host, Regen Ray. Hello, soil lovers, and welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Soil. I'm your host, as always, Regen Ray, and today we're going to be yarning with Terry McCosker from RCS. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of Terry. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ray.
Excellent. Such a big part that you've played over the many decades. For those who have been maybe under a rock or maybe new to the regenerative space, can you share a little bit about who you are and how you fit into the landscape?
Well, I think this year I'll be 55 years professionally working in agriculture. I started with Queensland DPI in 1967 as a cadet. Wow. And it's been a great journey ever since. I spent a lot of years with Queensland DPI, and that was a fantastic mentoring stage of my life, and then and learning. And then I went on to a property in the Territory where I had to jump the fence and work out what worked in the real world as opposed to what worked in theory. And that was a massive wake-up call for me. And I had to start all over again, actually, and develop a whole lot of stuff from first principles. And that led me into pasture degradation. So I was, we went from a beast to 100 acres to a beast to 35 acres in the Territory, and desirable perennials disappeared in 5 years. And that really worried me. And I didn't have an answer to it. Nobody I spoke to had an answer to it. And so it wasn't until a few years later in the late 80s that I met Dr. Stan Parsons, who was a Zimbabwean that had worked with Alan Savory and had developed the Ranching for Profit course. And then I started working with him in 89, and the rest, as they say, is history. So we've been in this space now for quite a long time, and it started out being based around grazing management. And I think one of my clients really summed it up very well a few years ago, and he said, I used to think that I was a livestock manager, and then I worked out that I was a grass manager, but now I know that I'm really a soil manager. And I think that it's that journey to understanding that everything comes from the soil, and it's the soil we've got to look after. That's a really key learning, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I love that. And such a great time in the market, I guess, of this knowledge. And I know when we put things together before, you kind of mentioned that, you've been 33 years in what is now called Regen Ag. What was it like before this word Regen Ag kind of came into place?
It was quite unbelievable, actually. The opposition to anything new and different was incredible. I had massive opposition from every state department of agriculture in Australia, several CSIRO divisions, and they, one of those organisations threatened to put me out of business and tried. And if it wasn't for clients, we never would have survived that onslaught. And it is amazing that when you come up with a changed paradigm and you bring that into a new paradigm, and that's really happening at the moment, I think, with soil health into the cropping industries, and the way we look at that, I think that there's another paradigm shift coming, and so you get significant opposition to that, and it's just the classic paradigm thing where, when somebody's career is wrapped up in the way we used to do it and the way we know that works, and you get somebody that challenges that, then they're going to be pretty significantly challenged back. So it certainly wasn't fun for a very long time.
I bet. And I hear stories from Helen and Hugo, which are also, early adopters, maybe, 15 to 20 years into this more natural biological farming, and hearing similar stories. And I really admire the resilience and the courage to stick at something, even though everyone else is kind of not seen on the same page. And it's quite refreshing to see, I'm coming in with fresh set of eyes and seeing people very excited about regenerative agriculture and even, being more stewards and caretakers of the land. What does that feel like now, knowing that you've been doing this for so long and seeing that kind of what they call the tipping point or the shift changing?
Yeah, I wouldn't agree we're actually at the tipping point yet. I still think we're with the very early adopters on a lot of stuff. I think in the grazing industry, we've seen a tipping point there. 30 odd years ago, there was nobody that moved animals, basically, except for dairy farmers. And then we started down the route of cell grazing, and there's still, I wouldn't say many people cell grazing, but there's a lot of people now rotationally grazing, and they're actually two different things. So at least, rotational grazing is a start down the right road, and it's better than continuous grazing. So, and I think that I would suspect now we're well over 50% in that sort of change in the number of people that are doing that. I think in the cropping industries, in terms of, really working on soil health, I think we've got a fair way to go yet.
Yeah. Okay. And that's awesome, because I love when there's the before the tipping point, when it's still the early adopters. It's where I've always, loved to hang out. And no doubt that's the reason why I discovered soil health when I did and got very excited about it. And so with rotational grazing and soil health being at the front center, what are some of the things that people that you've hung out with had to change in their mindset or their paradigms to start seeing the world beneath our feet?
I think it's starting to think holistically about things and understanding that how you graze a plant, for example, or how you harvest a plant or what you spray on it, all impacts the soil and all impacts the soil biology. And that then impacts the plant and impacts the animal. And I've got a really good diagram of how all of this interacts, so that, right back to profitability. And as you impact all sorts of things all the way through the chain, your profitability and ecosystem health will either spiral down or spiral up, depending on how you're driving that system. And I guess one of the things that really turned me on for soils was soil biology, and understanding that there is such a thing as soil biology, because back, for a very, very long time, soil biology has never been taught. And, I had a university lecturer only 3 years ago in a talk that I was giving. And, I was lamenting the fact that soil biology is not taught much in soil science or in universities. And she said, well, in our course, we've actually doubled the amount of time we're spending on soil biology. She said, we've gone from 1 lecture to 2. And that's 2 lectures on soil biology in a 4-year degree in ag science or rural technology. And I think that's very telling. And that's only a few years ago. And I introduced Elaine Ingham to Australia in 2000. So that's 22 years ago. At that stage, there was only, I believe, 6 soil microbiologists in Australia. I think there's a lot more now, and there's certainly a lot more interest. And I think that the work going on with human microbiomes is now really, that technology is allowing greater exploration of plant and soil microbiomes. And I think we're gaining very rapidly more knowledge in that space now, and understanding that soil is actually a living thing, not something we just stand on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that kind of research is super exciting in regards to seeing those links between the soil biology and then our gut biology, and how connected we are and what we mess up in that process, which has been a little bit out of sight and out of mind for very too long. And I look at the content coming into Farming Secrets and watching some of the videos, even videos of yourself from 10 years ago, and going, wow, this is so common sense. Why isn't everyone doing it? Why do you think it's taken so long to make sense of all this and have those penny drop moments where people just get it?
I think it's got to be, there's 2 levels with this, I think. One is the farmers themselves, and I think it's got to be simplified to a level where they can understand it's there, but not try and explain the complexity of it.
Yeah.
And the second level is that I think in terms of a lot of our advisors, our agronomists and our university graduates and people coming out to advise farmers, they're not really trained in soil biology and really don't understand the critical nature of it. And so it's almost a case of the blind leading the blind, if I can put it that way. That's pretty blunt, but that's almost what it is. And so, I find that as we try and shift paradigms in this, particularly in the cropping industries, the biggest obstacles we run into are the agronomists who are conventionally trained and what they're telling their clients generally works. But you've got to challenge how long it's going to work for, and also how economic it is now, particularly with the cost of inputs and the risks associated with those levels of inputs now. I think that is going to probably speed up change faster than anything, is people looking for other ways to do things because of the cost structure now.
Yeah. So you are seeing that people are more motivated to make this change, not because they feel like it's the right thing to do, but maybe because the input costs are unreachable now, or the cost of fertilizers and fuel and running the farm, and more profit is the driver. Is that what you're?
I think that's the driver of the pursuit of change. At the end of the day, I believe that real change into a regenerative space is a combination of head and heart shift. And that's a process. And all the successful regenerative people that I know, and I know hundreds, if not thousands, that, once it's that alignment between the head and the heart, and that the heart's in the right place, and we're understanding that we're a part of the ecosystem and a part of the soil and a part of the plants, and we're not apart from it. And I think it's possible to make a head shift alone and think, well, I need to shift because of economics. But I think that we really need to probably get the heart aligned with that, and then we're really going to make progress. Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm often saying we need to be regenerative humans before we can be regenerative land caretakers, because that's the filter. The paradigm is we are the decision maker, and that's been reaffirmed with doing holistic management, grazing programs, and for me, I don't even have land yet, so I'm just learning all this stuff because it feels like the most common sense thing to do to be a better person on the planet, to help change a lot of the systems. What's some of the changes that you're seeing happening out on the land and with the people that you get to hang out with that gets you excited the most?
I think, again, there's a dichotomy. There's two different industries with different approaches. So the grazing industry, I think, is really straightforward and simple, and that is basically changing grazing management. And when we get that right, and there's 6 very simple principles to follow, once we get those principles right, then the ecosystem will follow, and soil health will follow, biodiversity follows, water cycle improves, all of those things happen. And that's low risk. There's virtually no risk in making that shift in the grazing industry. As we move into the cropping industries, particularly the broad scale cropping industries, it's much trickier, much more difficult, and the risk levels increase as you want to shift. I use the analogy of a valley of death. So there's this, we're on one side of this, and our outcomes are generally, spending a lot of money on weed control, a lot of money on machinery. But we've got outcomes where our soil health is declining, pH is going down, minerals are tied up, mineral density in food is getting lower. And so when you really sit back and think about it, those outcomes must be a result of the inputs and what we're doing. So if we then think about this chasm that we've got to cross, the way I look at it is the first thing we've got to do is build foundations for a bridge. And those foundations we can build in the cropping industry with adding things like worm juice and compost extract to seed as we're planting it, making sure that we get rid of fungicide-coated seed. I can't think of anything worse for soil health than putting fungicide on the seed. Putting humates and food that's going to feed biology down the tube as well while we're planting. Stepping away from some of the fertilizers that harm biology, particularly the salt-based fertilizers and salt-based phosphorus fertilizers. Switching from throwing urea on the ground to applying it as a foliar application, for example. And straight away, you can save about 70% of your cost base. So there's a whole lot of small steps that you can make within an existing system that doesn't threaten the existing system. And all of those then start to build a more solid foundation in that soil for bigger changes as the soil starts to spiral up in its health.
Yeah, I really love that spiral up and spiral down. I've attended presentations where you put that on the screen, and it does really make that kind of sense, and the hope that the same way it spirals down, and it's almost like a bit of a domino effect of all these things kind of failing, and like you mentioned before, nutrient density and quality and more inputs. But then the opposite happens as well, where you start fixing one thing and then the water cycle fixes and then the nutrient density comes up, and it gives a lot of hope that we can have that positive domino effect in this spiral up way.
And we know that as that spiral goes up, it actually can accelerate. And one of the accelerators is soil carbon. And when soil carbon gets to around 2% or above, that spiral can accelerate in the way it creates health within the soil.
Yeah, I love that. So have you seen carbon in soils go from 2-3% as they used to be down to where they are now? Like, have you witnessed that on your own experience, or was it a bit before your involvement?
Oh, no, I've witnessed it in my own lifetime for sure, and probably created some of it with practices that I was doing, 20, 30, or not 20, but 30 to 40 years ago, and stuff that I wouldn't dream of doing today. I've certainly witnessed it and probably contributed to it. And I've also seen it reversed, and I think that's the exciting bit.
Absolutely. And so do you think there's still a lot of farmers out there that need to see it on their own land to believe it? I hear this thing all the time and go, oh, well, it works for you over there, but it won't work for me. Do you hear that all the time? I see you chuckling on the video.
Yes, I do. And our work is principle based. And so principles work anywhere, provided you apply them. And I think that's, I've been putting up with that sort of thing for a very long time in terms of grazing management, and I've yet to find an environment that won't shift or improve with the right grazing management. And I think it's exactly the same with soil health. I don't think there's a soil that we can't improve. I was very recently in West Australia, and some of the soils there, you basically wouldn't call them soils. They're really coarse sand. And yet there's evidence there now of being able to build carbon in those soils and start to create the cation exchange capacity that will hold nutrients and cycle nutrients and hold water in those soils. So I think, that's, if you can improve that in low and variable rainfall, then you can improve anything.
Yeah, I love that. You've mentioned carbon a lot, and I want to dig deeper in that world. But before we do, we're going to take a quick break. So soil lovers, stick with us. Hello, soil lovers. I hope you're enjoying today's guest and this podcast. But I wanted to just let you know that when you get excited about soil, just as you're hearing about our guests, then you will want to check out the Soil Learning Centre. The Soil Learning Centre is a hub that we put together and digitalized all the content over the years that were originally on DVD into this online learning experience. So if any of our guests or any of the topics that we speak about during the podcast whet your appetite and you want to get your hands dirtier and dig deeper and get educated around different things around soil, whether it be biodynamics, permaculture, whether it be using a microscope, or whether it just be hanging out with other like-minded educators, mentors, and facilitators, then the Soil Learning Centre is a place for you to hang out and dig deeper. That's the soillearningcentre.com. We have lots of different programs, courses, and even a membership. So if you want to belong to a community of other soil lovers, then that's the place to hang out. Well, until we meet again, enjoy the rest of this podcast. Back to the program. Welcome back, soil lovers. You're hanging out with Regenerative and Terry McCosker from RCS. Before the break, we spoke about carbon and being able to put it even into like really harsh environments. And you've got Carbon Link that you're part of as well. Can you share a little bit more about what that's all about?
Yes, probably nearly 20 years ago, I realised that a lot of people I was working with who were doing the grazing management right were actually adding carbon to their soils. And I thought at the time about that it would be great if they could get paid for that. And carbon credits were being talked about at that time. Anyway, about 16 years ago, I decided to do something about it. And I was basically 16 years ahead of my time. This year, we will actually issue the first credits from about 18,000 hectares that we measured in 2016. And that's a really exciting phase. So we now know that it's possible, that we can measure it. So we spun a company called Carbon Link out of RCS, and it's bounced along with one or two people in it for many years, and basically doing R&D, and then we accelerated the R&D. It's just taken off now. We have worked out how to measure carbon accurately, and we've now got about nearly 30 staff and 1.3 million hectares in our pipeline to do baselining and measurements on. So, and that's just taking off now at a great rate of knots, and that will continue to speed up and increase. So I think that the exciting thing for me, firstly, and I suppose the most exciting thing that's happened with me recently, is finding that we've sequestered carbon through droughts. So we've got 5 properties. They've all been through 2.5 years of drought out of 5. They've had pasture dieback on 3 of them. One of them was completely burnt out in the 2019 bushfires, and one of them's had 2 floods. So you name it, it's been thrown at these properties. And right across the properties at scale, we've actually been able to measure an increase in soil organic carbon. And I think the really exciting thing about that is where the carbon is. And what we're finding is that we're holding the carbon, and I would say at this stage that greater than 50% of the credits that will be issued from these properties is coming from below 30 centimetres. And traditionally, soils have only been measured in the top 10 centimetres. So, it's understandable why there's a lot of conflict over some of this data, because it really hasn't been measured in the right place and over the right sort of timeframes. But we're on that path now, and it's really exciting to see it come together.
Yeah, that is fantastic to hear. And even, that whole, the properties have gone through every single thing they can possibly go through. And people would say, I can't do that because we're in a flood prone, or we're in a bushfire risk area. We can't worry about that. And here you are creating all these scenarios and providing evidence, I guess, if people need to see that. And kudos to you and the team and everyone for making this a case study that people can lean on and look at. Is this public viewing data? Are you sharing what the carbon was and where it's at, or not yet?
We haven't. It's going through audit at the moment. The data we are sharing is some economic data we've put together on it. And I guess across these properties, I think there's an average of somewhere around $150 per hectare per annum earned through carbon credits at the current carbon price. Now, that is up to 10 times the net annual income per hectare earned by grazing on those properties through that drought. So it's actually significant. And I think what's happened is that and we can see this in some of the soils, because of the drought and the dieback, we've actually lost carbon in the top 30 centimetres, but it's stayed where it's been put below there. So not every topsoil has lost it, but some certainly have. And it's been interesting just seeing that and seeing what country type has actually sequestered carbon. And that's been contrary to our expectations as well. So we've learned a massive amount in the last 6 or 8 months as we're starting to pull this together now with a lot of really deep science behind it.
Yeah, I love that. And the ability to learn out loud and share it, because that's where, innovation comes from. And it's not a closed door conversation, raising this capital carbon and then leads to capital. It's shared, and we all kind of, what I'm gathering is everyone wants everyone to be able to do this and say, don't lose your farm, maybe go down carbon farming, do what you love doing, but add this extra kind of layer of income. And you're right, we don't know where the carbon price is going to go, but at least something is better than nothing. And if we don't even sell it, you've put the carbon back in the soil, and it just feels good to do that, So it's not even having to be linked to selling it.
That's the best point of all, Ray, I think, is that we should be doing this for the sake of our landscape, our soils, our production and our business. Mm-hmm. And carbon should be secondary to that. It's an outcome from that, not the reason that you should do this. And but it's an additional reward. And that's the approach that I take.
Yeah, I love that. I want to kind of just hear a little bit more about what got you into the land. Like, you come with such a wealth of knowledge, and I feel so honored to be able to chat to you and share this conversation with our soil lovers. Do you remember the time when you got interested in land, and then more importantly, the soil part of it? Do you have that distinct memory?
Yeah, I grew up on the land, and I can recall being connected to it since I was about 3 or 4. My earliest memory is actually being thrown off a horse at the age of about 3. But after that, I have a deep connection to the land itself, and I've maintained that. And I think that we sold the first property that I was on when I was about 12. And that was a shattering experience for me. I'll never forget that, actually being separated from that land. We bought another property, and then and eventually I actually bought that from my parents so that it would stay in the family. And so I think it's from a very, very early age, and I got that love of the land from my mother, and the love of agriculture. And I was really, really fortunate to be able to go straight from high school into a job with Queensland DPI, and then do a cadetship and study while I was working. And it was a fantastic way to learn. And so that's how I got started. And I think from the very beginning, as a kid, I was pulling peanuts and chipping corn and holding loosened bales around from a very young age, and that just connected me with it. I just loved being out in the dirt. I loved the dust, and I just loved being out, even just chipping weeds in a corn crop. That was just joy. So, from a very early age, there's a connection there.
Yeah, I love that. And for anyone who's listening who wasn't born on the land, do you think that there's a way that they can get themselves closer to the land? Is it just about volunteering, getting on the land, getting access to it? Is it starting in your own backyard? Can it be as simple as that?
Yeah, start in your own backyard, get your hands into it. And the thing that just occurred to me while you were saying that, my first pair of shoes I got when I went to high school, and that's because it was compulsory. So I lived all that early stage of my life with no shoes, and that also is connection. And I would advise people, even if they start in their backyard and are doing gardening and stuff, to start without any shoes. Just feel it, get connected to it, get your hands into it. And, even if it's just a little plot, or, grow some tomatoes in a pot or something, but get into it. And just that alone has healing capacity. Being involved with the soil, being outside, it's a cure for lots of things. And I've had a very, very healthy life. And I think the reason is that I grew up in that environment. Grew up milking cows every day, going down to the pig pen, and being in with the pigs once or twice a day, and all that stuff. I think helped build my microbiome from a very early age to be very strong, and I'm grateful for that to this very day, particularly in the current climate. I'm one of the few people that has not been affected by COVID, and yet everyone around me has, and I think it's just that resistance.
Yeah, it sounds magical, your upbringing and being able to, be in those environments. Does it worry you, the amount of sterilization that we kind of live in these days? And I think a lot of kids don't get access to this dirt and grubs, and you touch a bug and it's, oh, that's dirty, put it down. Like, how do we change that paradigm? Because these are kids that get taught that it's bad to touch soil and dirt and you got to wash your hands. How do we break that? Because I'm trying to.
We've got to try and get some gardening and stuff into primary schools, I think. So if they don't get it at home, at least they get it in school. I think we've got to try and get schools out onto farms. I just saw a clip on the news the other night about some kids at a school that might have been in Brisbane, out on a dairy farm, and the farmer had milked a cow and showed them where the milk actually came from, and was walking around with a bucket, and they were feeling the bucket, that it was warm, and it was like, that's milk? Like, is that where it comes from? And it's, we've got to try and educate these kids that is where it comes from. It's where meat comes from. It's where your potatoes come from. Your lettuce, everything starts and comes from there. So, yeah, we've got to get that connection back again. And it's really, my generation was much more connected. We all came from the land. We might have gone and done lots of other things, but many of us started there or had relatives were there and went and visited farms, and that has got less and less and less over time. And I am really concerned about this whole germ phobia and, not getting your hands dirty and not getting into soil. It's just, it's actually harmful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know if you know my catchphrase is like, get outside, get your hands dirty and keep digging deeper into our soils. And so that's the reason why I wanted to put that front and center in everything I do, because it is about breaking that paradigm that getting your hands dirty is probably one of the best things we can do. And I'm often just walking past pots and just stick my finger in or like touch the leaf and, change that, transfer that biology and that energy.
Yes, that's correct.
Fruit straight off the tree, and people, aren't you going to wash that? I'm like, how?
Exactly.
So it's great. And I know that you've got a conference coming up where you're going to be talking all about regenerative and so forth. And obviously you've seen that shift, and I've just found out that you run these events every 10 years. So you've got like these nice little bookmarks of how things have changed. Like, what's one big shift that you've seen from when you first run these events to what you're seeing now with the one coming up soon?
I think the linkage between soil health and human health is now much stronger. So we started down the soil microbiome route 20 odd years ago. We started linking agriculture and human health 10, 12 years ago. But this time we're going a lot further and looking a lot further into that. And also a lot of the interlinked parts of the planet. I have a real concern at the moment that there's a myopic view of carbon dioxide as being the enemy. And while ever that's the only enemy we've got, we're missing the point in terms of the planet. It is one component of the atmosphere, which is one component of what affects the climate, which is only one of Earth's systems that's in trouble. And, so I want to broaden the picture out well past carbon into all the other aspects of what's going wrong with our planet and what we can do to fix it. We don't want to just talk about what's wrong. We really want to look at what do we got to do. And we've used these conferences in our own business to say, we bring together some of the best brains in the world and what do we need to focus on going forward? And I think it was the involvement in our first conference with Elaine Ingham and people like Arden Anderson that really switched me on and said, soil has to be a major focus of ours going forward. And we've done that ever since. We started to do a little bit more on energy, in particular after our last one. There'll be a bit more energy stuff in this course, in this conference as well. But it's really... there's a whole lot of things converging, and everything from economies, when you really think about it, the root cause of our global warming is not CO2. It's our economic system that thinks there's such a thing as perpetual growth. And while ever we go out there and blame CO2, we're trying to treat a symptom which we'll never be able to treat, while ever we leave the cause there without pulling the scab off it and figuring what can we do about the economic system. And if we change that, things like CO2 will take care of itself, and so will the health of the planet. So I think we've got bigger issues to fry than CO2.
I think it's very easy for people to pass the blame and say, well, it's not me, it's the CO2 and it's all the companies. And it's, I've said this, it's not a carbon crisis we have, it's a citizen crisis. We've got to point the finger back at us and say, what do we need to do differently? And it's so refreshing, because I am having more conversations like this. In fact, an hour ago before our call, I was having a similar conversation to say it is our addiction to making more money, profit, consumption that is caused to a lot of these problems, and there is the whole minimalistic movement, but that's not enough, because for every person who wants less, there's someone who wants quadruple, so
yeah. And and we put value on things like a mobile phone instead of value on a bird or a tree or an ecosystem health or soil health. We don't survive if our ecosystem and our soil doesn't survive.
The phone, doesn't need us, but we need the bugs and the bees and the plants and even the weeds. The whole paradigm shift around weed. I don't even try and call them weeds anymore, but that's how people understand them. But it's like, that's a signal plant. Like, you would pay thousands of dollars to work out what's happening under the soil, but that weed is telling you if you learn why that weed is there, or that signal plant, as I now kind of call them. And there's a lot of free information right in front of our face if we use our five senses to
that's right.
touch, taste, and learn and mindset. So who are some of the speakers that are at the event, and are you offering a replay version that people can watch that weren't able to be in the room?
Yes, I'm pretty sure there'll be a recording, which will be available, fairly shortly. So we've got Zach Bush to start with, and Zach's been one who's really challenged and started to bring together the soil microbiome and the human microbiome issues and the use of things like glyphosate. Jacqueline McGlade, who is an amazing person, she lives in Kenya with her husband, who is a Maasai chief, but Jacqueline was been head of the science unit in the UN. She was head of the environmental movement in the EU, and she's a professor of two universities, and she's worked across the globe in all sorts of things. And so she's got some really interesting concepts to bring around the way we look at pulling up when we have enough. That sort of, what does she call? There's a name for it, something abundance, but and so it's the concept of, well, let's not just keep mining because we can. When we got enough, let's be happy with that and start, instead of focusing on, continuous growth, let's start focusing on health and happiness and, enjoyment and so on. We've also got Catherine Trebek, who's going to challenge our economic system and really look at, what are the alternatives to our current economic system, and what can we change and what should we change? Walter Yene talking about the small water cycle, large water cycles, which affects us all. It just goes on and on and on. So, and we've got quite a few producers talking as well, with some really fantastic stories about what they've created and done, including Diane Haggerty from West Australia. It's a pretty broad church of speakers.
Love that. It just sounds amazing, and I can't wait to get my hands on the replay. Unfortunately, I can't attend in person, but I definitely saw the speakers and lineups. And you've actually called the conference Convergence, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Of what you mentioned before, where it's a lot of these systems kind of converge into one point.
Yes, it's how do we capture that convergence of economies, of microbiomes, of farming systems, of all the knowledge that's starting to come together there. And then we'll be sitting down after that to figure out, well, what do we do with that? There's some really smart people here, including Charlie Massey and people like Fred Provenza, his wisdom is just mind blowing. So it has been very exciting.
Yeah, it just definitely sounds, and I can't wait to see it all and just learn, because I agree, being in the room or even hearing, reason why I have the podcast is to have conversations with yourself and others. And, we've had Fred Provenza and some of the others that you mentioned, but then being able to share it, because, knowledge kept secret doesn't get out. That's why Farming Secrets was designed to share those secrets from the farmers and not keep them, behind the, locked doors. And so what got you excited to start RCS many, many years ago? Like, what was your vision and mission back then?
That's a really good question. In fact, when I started it, I really didn't have a vision or a mission. And that came to me about 6 years later. And our mission today is to support farmers, who we believe are the most noble professionals in the world, to reach their highest calling, which is healthy food production. And so that really is what drives us, and has done now for well over 20 years, actually well over 30 years. And that was the turning point, actually, was really working out what our vision is and being clear about that. And and it hasn't really shifted now for 30 years. So that's been a driving force for myself and staff, because it's not just me in RCS. There's a lot of people.
Yeah, and I just want soil lovers out there listening. One key point that you make, and coming from the business world, I get this and I love it, and I want to highlight it, is because you started something without the mission and vision. And there's so many people out there that don't start something because they haven't got that sorted yet. But you doing something was better than nothing. And then years later, you discovered the mission and vision. And that wouldn't have happened if you never got started.
That's spot on. Yeah, because it grew and became really obvious out of what I was doing. And I was sitting, I can still remember where I was sitting in my lounge room at 9 o'clock one night, and it just bang, 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 bang. It just came, and I wrote it down, and there's a much longer one than the one I just gave you. And it was that long one that came to me at that time. And that was it.
Love it. I just wanted to highlight that because I got goosebumps when you said that you were sitting in your lounge room and it just came to you. And it's like those epiphany moments don't happen if you just don't go out there and start something.
That's right.
Perfect. So encourage all the soil lovers, if you're sitting on an idea or think that you want to do something to change the world in a positive way, like get out there and do it, because that's kind of where the real change makers and the exciting stuff happens. And Terry's a perfect example of that. Terry, are you ready to become the voice of our soils?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I can feel it. Excellent. Well, Terry, you have become the soil. You've embodied its power, its energy, and you are its mouthpiece. What would you tell us on planet Earth?
Firstly, let me breathe. I must be able to breathe. I must be able to drink. I must be able to work with all my microbiome. I want the roots. I want the exudates and the sugars that you're going to provide, the biology, which is going to help you and it's going to help me. But I can't do any of that if you don't let me breathe and you don't let me absorb the moisture that it's going to take to make all that happen and grow my microbiome.
Love that. Beautifully said. Breathe in water, growth, feed all the nutrition that's already there, and the amazing research that's coming out that all these plants and trees are communicating and sharing. And I'd argue that they got a better trade of economy under the ground than what we've done above the ground.
You're absolutely right. And I think their communication is better.
Yeah.
The system under the ground is highly intelligent. And I think, the sooner we recognize that, the better.
Yeah, I love that. Terry, it's been absolutely amazing hanging out with you and really getting a better understanding of, where you've come and what you've done. And it's just a real gift to everyone. So I appreciate that very, very much. Is there anything that you'd want to share with our soil lovers before we wrap this episode up?
I think we've covered it pretty well. Thank you, Ray, and thank you for your time, and thank you, soil lovers, for loving the soil. That's so important that we have more and more people loving it.
Absolutely. And so if people wanted to hang out with you more, and if they want to know about your conference, maybe they've missed this one and the next one's in 10 years, where do they hang out with you and RCS more?
The RCS website, which is rcsaustralia.com.au, www.that. And also Carbon Link is www.carbonlink.com.au. You'll find plenty of information on those websites, although both those websites are being upgraded over the next 6 months. And always feel free to ring. Track us down, give us a call. RCS has got a 1-800 number, which I can't quote.
Okay. We'll pop it around the
top
show.
of my head, but give us a call and have a yarn.
Absolutely. So great. Thank you so much, soil lovers. All the links that Terry mentioned and the 1-800 number will be on the show notes. And, as he says, the best thing to do is just talk and have a yarn about what's going on and see where you can kind of change your paradigm and get around like-minded people for that support, so you don't feel like you're that alone person just doing it that little bit differently, which I'm sure Terry felt and was around many people in the past.
If I had one thing to finish off with, it would be have the strength of your convictions and follow them.
Absolutely. I love the quote that they'll call you crazy and then one day they'll say, how did you do it? And I think you're probably getting that now is, how did you do it? You're probably called crazy back in the time. Well, soil lovers, there you go. We've been hanging out with Terry McCosker from RCS. Until next time, as you know, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into our wonderful world of soils. Until next time, stay curious. Well, soil lovers, that's enough secrets for one episode. I really hope that you enjoyed all the secrets shared during this conversation. But hey, let's not keep it a secret. Please share this podcast around and make sure that you like it and leave us a review, because that really helps spread the secrets of the soil. Until next time, remember, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils.